Welcome to the Deep Dive. You send us the sources, things you're curious about, and, well, we dig in. We pull out the essential stuff for you.
Yeah, quick and thorough. Think of it as your shortcut to getting up to speed.
So today, we're heading into, maybe slightly darker territory. Audio horror.
That's right. It's based on some really interesting things you send over. We've got a BBC piece looking back at Orson Welles' famous War of the Worlds.
Oh yeah, the classic.
We've got articles digging into how you actually rate audio horror, how to appreciate it, and even a list of modern horror podcasts to check out.
Exactly. The mission today. Figure out why just listening to something can be so effective, so genuinely scary.
It's a fascinating question, so let's dive in.
Okay, where do we start? That Welles broadcast seems like the obvious place. October 30th, 1938.
Definitely. War of the Worlds. Orson Welles, the Mercury Theater on the air. They took H.G. Wells' novel.
But they didn't just read it, did they?
No, not at all. They framed it as a series of breaking news bulletins.
Yeah.
Really clever.
Yes.
And they shifted the location, made the Martian invasion happen in New Jersey right then and there.
To make it feel immediate, like it was actually happening outside your window.
That was the intention, absolutely. Maximum impact through realism. Now, the legend, of course, is mass panic across the U.S.
Right, everyone running for the hills.
Well, that's the story. But more recent historians, looking back, they suggest the panic might have been, well, overstated. Maybe significantly so.
Okay, so what's the counter-argument?
The BBC article touches on this. It suggests newspapers who were, let's face it, competing with radio for news dominance back then.
Okay.
They might have played up the hysteria quite a bit,
Yeah.
To kind of discredit this new medium.
And Welles himself, did he push that story?
It seems he wasn't exactly opposed to, let's say, burnishing the myth a little in later retellings. Added to his mystique, I suppose.
But here's the key thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of how many people actually panicked.
Exactly. Regardless of the scale, the broadcast undeniably showed the immense power radio already had, even in those early days. It captured people's attention, their imagination, in a profound way.
And you have to think about the context, too. Radio was becoming the main news source for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, this was 1938. Europe was on edge, World War II looming. People were sort of primed for bad news, for interruptions to their regular programs.
Absolutely. That made the format even more believable. People were used to hearing urgent news updates cut in. So when this started...
It felt plausible, even though there was a disclaimer at the start saying it was fiction.
There was, yeah. But, people tune in late. Maybe they weren't fully listening, or maybe the drama just swept them up and they forgot about that initial announcement.
And the broadcast itself.
Yeah.
It started like a normal music show.
Pretty much. Regular dance music. Then suddenly these bulletins cut in. Increasingly frantic reports about Martian landings, heat rays, military defeats.
All with sound effects.
Oh yeah, incredibly realistic for the time. The sounds of chaos, the Martian machines. It was designed to sound utterly convincing.
And the reported reactions were pretty wild. People trying to flee, grabbing weapons.
Phone lines jammed, apparently. People desperate for information or trying to reach loved ones. And the police showing up at the studio.
Right, trying to shut it down.
That really tells you something about how seriously it was being taken, at least by some.
Imagine being Welles, seeing the cops pour into the control room.
He apparently realized then, looking at the chaos, that he'd accidentally stumbled into a huge national event.
The aftermath must have been intense.
Oh, it was. Huge media backlash, government looking into it, threats of lawsuits flying around. The FCC investigated.
Did they find they broke any laws?
No, technically no laws were broken, but the networks definitely agreed to be more careful going forward. No more fake news bulletins like that.
But ironically, the whole scandal actually helped Welles.
Kind of propelled him, yeah. It put him on the map as this master storyteller, this provocateur. It led directly to his Hollywood deal and eventually Citizen Kane.
Wow. And there's that story he told about Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah, quite chilling, actually. He said when the news of the actual Pearl Harbor attack broke during one of his later radio shows, some people didn't believe it at first.
They thought it was another War of the Worlds.
Exactly. Shows you just how deep that broadcast lodged itself in the public consciousness, how it affected trust in media.
So, okay, the exact level of panic is debatable. How many people were listening is maybe unclear, but its place in history, undeniable.
Absolutely. A landmark moment for broadcasting and for storytelling.
Okay, so that sets the stage historically.
Yeah.
Let's pivot now to the craft. How do you actually make horror work purely with sound?
Right. One of the sources you sent lays out this sort of generic model, it calls it, for writing scary audio stories.
A blueprint for fear. Okay, what does it look like?
It suggests a kind of typical progression. You start in an unfamiliar place, maybe slightly unsettling. Then that place turns hostile.
Okay.
Then you introduce something ill-defined, a presence, something malevolent, but you don't show it clearly.
The unknown.
Precisely. Then you start undermining trust. Support systems fail, people betray each other. You only give glimpses of the threat, never a full view.
Keep them guessing.
Yeah. Then the protagonist shifts from observer to victim. They're pursued, hunted, trapped. And finally, there's this confrontation with something that feels overwhelmingly powerful, where winning or losing both have terrible costs.
That definitely maps onto a lot of horror stories. It highlights those core emotions too, doesn't it? Fear of the unknown, hostility, betrayal.
Isolation, powerlessness, being hunted, feeling trapped. Despair, really.
That isolation point feels key, and the betrayal of trust.
The source really emphasizes those. Good horror, it argues, often attacks our fundamental reliance on safety, on comfort, on other people. It pulls the rug out.
And it points out, this doesn't even need ghosts or monsters, right? Like Animal Farm or Lord of the Flies.
Exactly. Those stories are terrifying because they show the breakdown of social trust, the removal of those protections we take for granted. Cruelty itself becomes this kind of invisible predator.
That connects nicely with Stephen King's idea, which was also mentioned, the 3 types of terror.
Right. King talks about the gross out, blood and guts, shock value, then horror, the unnatural, the impossible, the monster.
Like a zombie or a vampire.
Yeah. But then there's terror, and that's the subtle one, the unsettling feeling, the creepiness, the sense that something familiar is wrong, or that there's a presence you can't quite see.
Like footsteps upstairs when you're alone.
Exactly. And that, the terror, is where audio can really shine, because you can't see. Your imagination does the heavy lifting.
So specifically for audio or radio horror, what are the big advantages?
Well, according to the Writing Radio Plays source, the biggest advantage is your special effects budget is basically infinite.
Because it's all in the listener's head.
Precisely. The power of suggestion is immense. You don't need CGI, you just need the right sounds and the right words to plant an image.
So it's like telling spooky stories around a campfire, but amplified.
Kinda, yeah. You weave a world with sound and story, and suspense, like Hitchcock always said, is much more important than gore, especially in audio.
Making the listener wait, building that anticipation.
Right. Using what the source calls patterns of peril, these cycles of brief safety followed by renewed threat keeps the tension high. It's the difference between horror, the jump scare, and terror, that slow burn dread.
But there are challenges too, right? You can't just show things. Your audience is essentially blind.
That's the main hurdle. How do you convey setting, action, the look of the monster purely through sound?
You can't just describe everything, I guess.
Well, using a narrator can work, but sometimes it creates distance, makes it less immediate. Relying only on sound effects can be confusing or cliché if not done well.
Like just playing a creaking door sound.
Yeah, it needs context. Music is vital for mood, but it's abstract. It doesn't give concrete details. And interestingly, even adding a second character, while it allows for dialogue, can sometimes weaken that crucial feeling of isolation.
So if you're trying to keep that isolated feeling, what works?
Techniques like having a single character talk to themselves, maybe voice their thoughts or fears aloud, or even talk to something they imagine is there.
Gets us inside their head.
Exactly. But one really effective technique highlighted is called narration with accompaniment.
Okay, what's that?
It's where a character within the story starts telling another scary story. And as they tell it, that story is enhanced with sound effects, music, maybe brief bits of dialogue from the story they're telling.
Like a story within a story, but sonically illustrated.
Precisely. The source mentions an example from Grimm Scary Tales about corrupt crusaders finding an ocean of bones. The character narrates this horrifying scene, and the sound design brings a narration to life.
That sounds really effective. It lets you control the narrative tightly, but still makes it immersive.
It does. It creates a kind of distance, but also draws you in through the teller's fear. It allows you to fuzz up the perception, keep things unknown and unsettling, delaying the direct confrontation with whatever the main threat is. That's key.
Build the dread.
Build the dread. And remember, in horror, especially audio horror, less is often more when describing the monster. Let the listener's imagination conjure the real terror.
It's about creating that pervasive sense of dread, isn't it? Which feels different from, say, an adventure story where you expect the hero to win.
Very different. In horror, the escape isn't guaranteed, and the unknownness inherent in audio makes that dread even more potent. You can't just look away.
Which brings us neatly to today, podcasts. Audio drama is having a real moment, isn't it?
It really is, a kind of modern golden age echoing that original radio era, as one source puts it.
And the production values now can be incredible.
Definitely. Professional writers, actors, amazing sound design, really natural voice work. It's far beyond just people reading scripts.
And horror podcasts are hugely popular.
Yeah.
It just shows how well audio works for this genre. You said that example script too, In Your Dreams.
Right, that contemporary audio horror piece.
Tell us a bit about that one.
It's about someone who checks out a horror book from a library and then has this incredibly vivid, terrifying dream. And there's this creepy librarian who seems connected to it.
And the sound is crucial there.
Absolutely. You hear the rain outside, footsteps echoing, thunder, bat wings, this really unsettling music. It all builds the atmosphere, the tension, blurs that line between dream and reality for the character.
And that ending kind of leaves you hanging, suggesting it's not over.
Yeah, that cyclical nature is quite common in horror, the feeling that the threat lingers.
And for anyone wanting to explore more, there's that list of horror podcasts you included.
A great starting point. It shows the sheer variety out there.
Looking at it, you've got things like Knife Point Horror,
Yeah.
that's more indie-focused, intense fiction.
Yeah, often single narrator, very atmospheric. Then you have Lore, which is totally different based on true scary stories, folklore, historical mysteries.
More nonfiction, but still creepy.
Definitely. And things like the Magnus Archives, which is serialized fiction, a big unfolding story. Or the No Sleep podcast, which is an anthology, lots of different stories each episode.
So loads of different styles and approaches within horror audio drama now.
Absolutely. A really vibrant scene.
Okay, let's wrap up by circling back to that core ingredient, suspense. There was another source focused just on that, right? Suggestions for writing suspense in audio drama.
Yes, drilling down into how you actually build that tension effectively.
So what are the key takeaways there? How do you keep listeners on the edge of their seats?
Fundamentally, suspense comes from worry. So step one, make the listener care about the character. They need to be relatable.
Get us invested.
Exactly. Then, often, you create suspense by letting the listener know something the character doesn't. That gap in knowledge creates unease.
The don't go in there feeling.
Precisely. Posing questions early on is vital. What's making that noise? Who's behind this? And then delaying the answers while making the situation more dangerous.
Raising the stakes constantly.
Right, but eventually, there has to be revelation. The character must find out what's going on. The listener needs that payoff.
And using sound to put us in their shoes.
Crucial. Focusing on the character's senses through sound, their breathing, heartbeat, tiny environmental sounds makes the suspense immediate, visceral, and the final payoff, the resolution, needs to feel earned, proportionate to the tension built.
What about things to avoid? Pitfalls.
Don't just rely on the main character being in danger. Threats to others we care about raise the stakes too. Putting total strangers in peril doesn't usually land with the same impact. Don't overdo the obstacle so it just feels frustrating or unbelievable. And crucially, answer the question you set up. Don't subvert expectations just for the sake of it if it undermines the whole suspense arc.
So it's about empathy, anticipation, careful reveals, and a satisfying, often scary resolution.
That sums it up pretty well.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from Orson Welles' possibly terrifying a nation to the nuts and bolts of making fear audible, right through to the amazing horror podcast you can listen to today. It really shows the unique power of sound, doesn't it?
It really does. How suggestion, sound design, and good storytelling can tap into something really primal.
And hopefully for you listening, this deep dive has given you a solid grasp of why audio horror works so well and why it continues to fascinate us.
Yeah, a quick tour through the history and the techniques behind the chills.
So we'll leave you with a thought to mull over. Given everything we've discussed about suggestion and the power of sound, what are those truly deep fundamental fears that audio, all by itself, can unlock within you?
Maybe something to think about next time you turn down the lights and put on your headphones.
Definitely. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.